Welcome to The Jewish Lens, a podcast to discuss anything and everything from a Jewish perspective. Now, please help me welcome the man who controls the media, your host, Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and today I am thrilled to be joined by the editor and publisher of The Jewish Voice and Opinion. Please help me welcome Susan Rosenbluth. Susan, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Jonathan. I'm really so happy to be here, and I'm going to apologize to all of your audience because something is wrong with my computer speakers. You know, the technology isn't perfect, so I can hear you on the telephone, and I'll speak through the computer. And please God, it'll all work.
Yeah, I've been doing this for a few years now, so each time I have a new experience, so that's good. I'm always able to be surprised. Well, let's go on. So we have a lot to cover, but I want to start with, I want to hear a little about you. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in New Jersey, born in New York, but raised on the Jersey Shore. You all watch that television program, which has nothing to do with reality. I actually grew up in Ventnor, which is right downbeat from Atlantic City. And oh boy, what they did to my town. I just stayed in New Jersey. I went to school in New York, and lived for a little while in Washington and in Philly, which wasn't too far away. But I've been back in New Jersey since 1975.
Oh wow!
So,
wow, were you from like a Jewish-minded family, religious family at all?
Absolutely. Jewish-minded, Jewish-identifying, nice, conservative family. You know, before the first Lebanon War, before the late 1980s, when you would ask a Jewish family in America, it was if you were pro-Israel, you were pro-Israel. We really didn't sit in America, most of us, and make the distinction whether you were supporting Labor or Likud. Were you right? You weren't right wing or left wing. You were supportive of Israel, yay team, supportive of the fact that we had a Jewish state. The nuances, I think, were mostly lost on the Jewish community. When I got involved in Jewish journalism and became part of the American Jewish Press Association, and early on, through the 70s and even the early 80s, it was really a matter of how pro-Israel we were. That was the deciding line. I remember I worked in New Jersey. My first job with a Jewish newspaper was for the Jewish Standard, which was pretty much it still is, a secular Jewish weekly newspaper. And I remember when the Federation decided they wanted to start a newspaper, my original feeling was, you know, if you're going to do Tweedledum and Tweedledee, what do we need it for? What I started to realize about the Jewish press in America is that they liked the Orthodox community as long as we were singing and dancing. When we sang and danced, they loved us. When we had something to say, they didn't like us so much anymore, and there was no way to get our voice out. And that was true whether it was from the Federation papers or many of the private papers. They loved us for culture. They loved the idea of Jewish grandmothers sitting and making challahs and grandfathers singing old nigunim, and that was all great. When we started to say that we had political opinions, it became much harder.
You went against the norm. You went against
the norm. Right? It was hard. Right. Thank God, one of the really early pioneers with that was the Jewish press. Mm. And the Jewish press is still wonderful. It has really improved over the years. I realized that the community that I was reaching, which was pretty much the modern Orthodox community, born in the United States, basically not an immigrant community, although our parents or grandparents were. And our kids were going to day school. The adults were professionals or business people becoming rather well-heeled. We were all over the place economically, of course, but the For want of a better term, I call it modern Orthodox. What makes us modern Orthodox? We're just like any other Orthodox. The only difference is that we send our kids to college and we say a prayer for the state of Israel. And we can daven together. So I call it modern Orthodox because, for want of a better term, at this point, many people that would shy away from the whole term modern Orthodox are still saying prayers for the state of Israel and sending their kids to college. So those lines are becoming much more blurred. That's why I started the Jewish Voice and Opinion. We needed a voice. We needed a platform, and the Jewish Voice and Opinion did it.
I'm going to ask about that too. Yeah, I shouldn't say go against the norm. I should say go against their ideas of the norm. But so when did you first start writing when you were growing up? When did you first start getting interested in writing?
Oh, that's a funny story. When I was, about 10 years old, I marched myself into the local weekly newspaper. I guess today we call it a shopper. Basically, it took advertising and threw some editorial content, some text content around it, so it would have a weekly newspaper. And there it was called the Down Beach Crier. And the Down Beach Crier came out every week, and I marched myself in. Why? I wanted to do interviews. I really wanted to interview some of the celebrities who were coming to local places in Atlantic City. I was 10 years old, and they looked at me and they said, sure. And they named the column, wait for it, Newsin with Susan. And Newsin with Susan appeared weekly. And I did that from the time I was 10 until I graduated from high school. And they gave me a space. They said, write. And every week I got my copy in and I wrote. It never occurred to me to major in journalism because I was told, don't major in journalism, major in something so you'll have something to talk about and write about. And so I went to NYU. And because I found anthropology fascinating, I minored in anthropology, and I would have loved to have majored in comparative literature, but I majored in French and Spanish, and went on to get a master's degree in human development, which was part of education. And I taught school because that's what nice Jewish girls did in the late 60s and 70s. And I started having children. I'm married, of course. My husband is a physician, and in his training, he went to various places, which is why we traveled. We have 3 children, all married, and we have 13 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. But I was teaching school when one of the local papers, it was the Jewish Standard, asked me to write something about education, and I did. And after I wrote it, basically what I wrote was that even in the time of computers, there still would be nothing to take the place of the teacher-child relationship. And they asked me to write more for them, so I kind of held my breath, said, okay, stop teaching, and began writing full-time.
Well, just curious now, you said you interviewed celebrities when you were 10 years old? Anyone?
I did. I did. Oh, golly. I interviewed, they were actually quite interesting. After Exodus, I got to interview Sal Mineo.
Oh, wow.
And found out just how much he really appreciated the Jewish state, which was really terrific. I interviewed Ricky Nelson. I interviewed the Beatles. It was great.
Oh,
I would walk, I had a press card, and I was 12 years old. I said, I'm the press. And you know what? I was. And I found out just how much the press can really do. It's a tremendous power. I sometimes think people don't recognize it's more powerful before we write our stories than afterwards. We write our stories and then, that people read them and the next day they wrap fish in them. But before they come out, everybody thinks it's going to be so important. But it was a tremendous learning experience for me.
Did you take writing in college too? Will you take journalism at all in college?
I did not. I wrote for the school newspaper. I always wrote for newspapers. and learned, the pyramid style. Make sure, basically, all the pyramid style is make sure you get what you want up front. As an editor, I very often have people who want to write for the paper, want to write for us. And, the beginning is like, oh my God. I would say the beginning can be they're clearing their throats. Some people take a paragraph to clear. Some people take 2 paragraphs to clear. So I usually tell them, start with the third paragraph, because then we're going to get to the meat of it. Or I'll have people who tell me, yeah, I know it starts a little slow, but when you get into it, it really gets good. And I said, honey, they won't get that far. Readers will give you 2 sentences, and after that, they go and turn on the TV.
I was a literary agent for a while, and that's exactly. And people used to do it all the time. Well, it really gets good on page 3 or like chapter 2. So why aren't we starting on chapter 2? Right. I kept having to say that people will.
They're clearing. Right. They're clearing their throat. And it doesn't work. I do have a novel coming out. Isn't that exciting?
Oh, I'll have to hear about it. We'll get to. We'll get to that. I'll talk about that toward the end. So how did the Jewish Voice and Opinion come about, and what's its purpose?
The Jewish Voice and Opinion came because I was working after the Jewish Standard. I worked for a publication that met a very well-deserved early death called the Bergen Jewish News, which was from Bergen County, New Jersey. And it was done by the Federation, whose idea was, they were playing with other people's money. Other people's money, meaning people who were giving donations to the UJA, to Federation, and it was being just absolutely fittered away on a newspaper that didn't need half the money they were putting into it, and really was nothing more than really just a vehicle for their organization. There is a place for that. There's nothing wrong. One of the best Jewish magazines ever used to be the one that Hadassah put out. It was a great magazine, very pro-Israel, super thing. And I'm not saying they don't have a place, but it's good to know that that's what they're doing, and this paper didn't do it. And I realized at that point, because I was writing stories that would reflect where the politically conservative, a lot of it, the Orthodox community was. And I realized that we really just needed a voice. So I kind of held my breath and opened the Jewish Voice and Opinion, did things that nobody had done before. One of the things we did was we said we will not knowingly take any ad that would encourage anybody reading it to either eat non-kosher or to be Machal Shabbos, or to desecrate the Sabbath, or to desecrate the holidays. And we stuck to it. Our advisory board was the Rabbinical Council of Bergen County, which is the local VOD. And basically we would get a call from a restaurant saying, can we advertise? And we would just call the rabbis. If a congregant asks you, can I eat an XYZ? Rabbi, what is your answer? They said yes. We took the ad. They said no. That was the end of it. And people knew, therefore, I called it our own good housekeeping seal of approval. People knew when they found things in our paper, it meant a certain standard. And that really helped us for 35 years. Very, very helpful. Towards the end, a wonderful, wonderful group of people came in. What they really wanted to do was to start a weekly based on the kind of thing we were doing as a monthly. They wanted to do it larger, and I was absolutely thrilled, really thrilled. I did not want to do a weekly at this point. It was more work than I wanted to do. I do write for them. And of course, the Jewish Voice and Opinion is now available online. You can see our articles.
Online now?
It is online now, thejewishvoiceandopinion.com, and is spelled out AND. But my work does appear in newspapers throughout the country, in the American Jewish Press Association, which includes both the United States and Canada. And as I say, I do a lot of work for the Link, and you can find that online too.
No, you have your site. The site, the Jewish Voice and Opinion, is very interesting. It has a lot of besides the regular articles, it has a lot of recommendations on restaurants also, and
Yeah.
recipes I saw as well. So you have this name, Jewish Voice and Opinion. So you had it for many years. So then this another organization comes over using the Jewish Voice, which is far from pro-Jewish. So how did you feel when that happened, when you saw that?
Well, the truth of the matter is, the Jewish Voice is probably one of the most common names for Jewish newspapers across the country. You have lots and lots and lots of Jewish voices. That's why we decided to be the Jewish Voice and Opinion, and we insisted on both. And most people know who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, our opinions were very reflective. There was no secret about where we stood politically. I had many people who would say to me, "Why didn't I give both sides in our articles?" And I would say, if the Jewish Voice and Opinion, if I thought for a second that the Jewish Voice and Opinion were the only thing you were reading, we would have had to give every side, up the hill, down the hill, and right and left, and everything. But I was so sure that my readers were reading other things as well. So I always said to them, ours is the other side, the side most newspapers won't give you. And that was what our purpose was. Now, I really trust my readers' intelligence. My mantra is never underestimate your readers' intelligence. Never overestimate your readers' information. My job was to make sure I gave you the information that I think you need so that you can go out and form your own opinion. I trust you.
How long did it take for you to see that the paper was like taking off, that it was doing well, that people were, reading it?
Kenai Hara, Baruch Hashem, the paper was successful, I would say, from the second or third issue that we came out with. We had, a little over 25,000 homes by mail once a month. Advertisers, people knew that to be in our paper meant that I would discourage anybody else. I remember sometimes we called our real estate section "Live Where You Can Walk to Shul." We did it. That was what we called it editorially. Not, no one was violating any kind of laws because that's what we did it editorially. They just put in their paper, in their ads. But I would tell people who wanted to put ads in from places when we hit the Orthodox community, modern Orthodox straight through to much more traditional, and people who would want to put in ads. And they say, "Oh, well, we have a Reformed temple, about half or a mile away or 2 miles away." And I would say to them, unless you're looking for our people to invest, maybe, I don't know, save your money, because there was no point in offending people gratuitously. This is one of the things that I argue about. On Wednesday, I saw a very interesting play which I will be writing about, I guess today actually, to get it online. The name of the play is Observant. And it's a very interesting play. I don't know if you're old enough. Do you remember Rabbi Benji Levine? Rabbi Benji Levine.
It sounds familiar. Now I have to look.
Rabbi Benji Levine was a theater major at Yeshiva University. Oh golly, certainly back in the 90s, maybe 80s. And he had a one-man show that he took all over. He took all parts, and he called it The Four Faces of Israel, where he would portray a Haredi Jew, and people could ask questions from the audience, and he would answer as a Haredi Jew would. He answered as a Hiloni Jew in Israel, driving a bus, smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. He was a absolutely intermarried, non-observant, not even abiding culturally, French Jew who was an artist living in Tzfat, who was intermarried but living in Tzfat. And then he also had the wealthy American who would say, "I've been to Israel 345 times," and he would say, "Okay, who represents Israel?" And it would really be so interesting to watch it. And that's sort of what this play, Observant, did. They did it within a microcosm of a family. They did one thing, and when I caught them on it, I think they sort of jumped back. At one point, they have the observant part of the family saying a bracha. And obviously, it's not a bracha they were really making. It was the wife lighting Shabbos candles. But she made the bracha using HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name, using God's name. And whereas most people say, if you're not going to do it, you say Ad Hashem. We make the distinction. And I said, is there a reason why you didn't do that? I'm quite sure, by the way, the reason was that they didn't know. I'm quite sure the reason was that somebody didn't say to them, you're being gratuitously offensive. It doesn't affect the drama of the play. It doesn't affect the story. The only people who would recognize it are those who will say, oh, I'm glad they did it that way. So I think it's important, whether we're talking about advertising in our paper. I always turn around. I mean, I don't know how anybody else feels, but the idea of a paper that has Jewish in its name, Jewish Week, Jewish Voice, Jewish whatever, and then has ads for Chazatreif, for poor. It's just not necessary. It's not as though you're the only paper that these people are reading. There are other places they can advertise elsewhere. I certainly do not hold it against a Jew who wants to do it. That's an individual opinion.
A restaurant must be kosher to advertise in the Jewish.
In our paper, it's not only to be kosher, it can't just say it's kosher, it has to meet the standards of the local Orthodox rabbinate.
So did the observant get a thumbs up or thumbs down from you overall?
A thumbs up because it is interesting. Thumbs up. We in our paper, I write with a colleague of mine, Sue Weston. We call ourselves two Sues on the aisle. And we rate anything we're reviewing. We rate it from 1 to 5 challahs, depending on how many it pays to buy rather than make in order to see whatever it is that we're reviewing.
So you mentioned Israel several times, and it seems to be important. Have you been to Israel often or no?
Oh, yes. Not only that, but my husband and I have an apartment in Netanya. So we have started what we're calling Aliyah Light. What is Aliyah Light? Our kids live here. My grandchildren, by the way, I have no doubt will all wind up in Israel. They've all gone into fields which are, as I call them, portable. They're things that they'll be able to use when they want in Israel. But we want to. My husband and I do want to be able to be citizens. I want to vote in the next Israeli election.
I used to live there as a kid, and my daughter's there now, actually, in Israel.
Wonderful.
Yes.
Wonderful.
So talking about that, so when October 7th happened, so how did you find out about it, and how did it impact you that day?
So interesting. We were at home, and of course it was Simchas Torah. We have a non-Jewish neighbor who came running in to our to the house at about, she knocked on the door 7:45. And she saw us, we were getting ready to go to shul, and she looked at it, she said, "You don't know." And I said, "Know what?" And she turned on the television, and we went, "Oh my God." I mean, obviously we weren't the only ones. I don't know how people did know. People found out. It was the one thing I remember sitting there transfixed, watching. And in the very beginning, I mean, we're journalists. Journalists means we're looking, we're observing. What are we seeing? And when they were showing the pictures early on, before we even knew the full terrible total, we're looking at the faces of the people who were taken hostages, the people who were murdered. And I said, "Where are the kippahs? Where are the kippahs?" Among the victims on October 7th, I mean, they were ours, make no mistake. Hilani, Ati, whatever they were, these are our kids. They were our kids, they were our sisters and brothers, and no one could feel worse. But I couldn't get over it. Why weren't there? Why didn't it was Simchas Torah? Why didn't we see more? And of course, we found out why. There were reasons for that. where they could get in. Obviously, we weren't going to find any Dutchy people at the music festival on Simcha. I mean, that's not where our kids would be. There were people who lost their lives because they went fishing on Shabbos. Obviously, members of the Orthodox community didn't go fishing on Shabbos. As we all know, once Israel took up arms, now we see loads and loads of kippahs and funerals with traditional parents. It's across the board. It's across the board.
It was just off. I mean, it didn't matter to
it didn't matter to. I mean, you had people. You had. I think for about a month, 2 months, maybe a little more, the unity in the Jewish community was something that if only we could have maintained it. If only we could have maintained it.
But what you said, how was it afterwards, in the aftermath of that, where you live? Did you started seeing all the hate-filled marches around your areas at all?
In our area, I mean, Teaneck is a very, very Jewish community. I think at this point, Teaneck is probably between 30 and 40% Jewish, so which makes it very, very Jewish. And we're not that far from Patterson, which is a community that has a lot of Arabs and descendants, Arab Americans living. And we've had a number of contingents from Patterson who have come to Teaneck to demonstrate in Teaneck against the Jewish community. It's been, I mean, thank God Teaneck has a wonderful police force. It has its first responders are terrific. And there have been no incidents. It's unpleasant, but there have been no incidents.
When you and I first started, talking online, you had mentioned that you had thoughts on politics, with both American and Israeli. So let's start with American. And I don't like to get too political here,
I love getting political. Get as political as you want.
I'm registered under one party, but my vote is, not necessarily tied to one party. Oh, so what do you feel is being done, right or wrong, to help fight anti-Semitism and Jew hate in this country right now?
Not enough.
Right.
I will not listen to people who want to say that America is like watching what's happening in America is like watching Berlin in 1933. Mm-hmm. The biggest difference is that the government is not against us. In Berlin, if you had kids doing or anybody doing what you see some of these students doing at schools like Columbia, right, the police not only would not protect Jews, the government would join in. The police would join into the brutality and the harassment. That has not happened. If anything, I would tell you that the police are on our side. The police are eager to protect us. I have seen absolutely no anti-Semitism on the official levels. For my own, where I see things coming, like many other Jews in this country, I grew up as a Democrat. For me, GOP meant Goyim on parade. And for a long time, the ideal, I used to say, the ideal was AIPAC. Mort Klein's ZOA was reflecting what we wanted. Being pro-Israel should be an across-the-aisle endeavor. It was a wonderful thing when you would see Democrats and Republican congressmen, senators. They may disagree on other things, but when it came to supporting Israel, there was no question. We've lost that. We've lost that because the political parties obviously reflect their voters. They have to reflect their base. And unfortunately, the people who want to say to you, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Zionist. My answer when I hear that is, during the Inquisition, you never heard people say, we hate Jews. We don't hate Jews, we hate their religion. In the 20th century, late 19th, we don't hate Jews, we hate their race. So now we don't hate Jews, we hate their nation state. But this time they're fooling no one. It's the same anti-Semitism dressed up in a different gown, and that's all it is. And to try, you can stand and let your Peter Biner can stand and let his head touch his toes, trying to say it isn't, but it is. And everybody who is reasonable and sensible, including the haters, know it.
Well, yeah, the anti-Semites got smart and figured they could just replace the word Jews with Zionists and everything's okay. That's it.
Exactly. And so at this point, what I would say to anybody, I wish it were the Democrat Party that I grew up with. I mean, I had heroes. I mean, we had people like Hubert Humphrey who were amazing. Pat Moynihan was wherever he is. I don't even want to think how he feels about the party that was his. I mean, these were wonderful people. It's not what we have. When you can have people, I'm not going to tell you that I think Kamala Harris is an anti-Semite, but she and her running mate had no problem talking about the kids who were demonstrating. We hear you, and we understand where you're coming from. That means I can't vote for you. That means what do we know about President Trump? Do I think President Trump is the saint? I mean, there are people I know who they think he's crude, they think he's this, and I'm not going to sit here and argue. The issue is that if you don't like the way he talks, don't invite him for tea for Shabbos. If you think he's funny, invite him for tea for Shabbos. The issue isn't the personality. The issue is policies. I would ask any pro-Israel Jew who says, I don't like Trump, I would say, which of his policies do you disagree with? You don't disagree with him putting the embassy in Jerusalem. You don't disagree with the camp. You don't disagree with the Abraham Accords. What do you disagree with?
Well, when you mentioned also, when you see like things like anti-Semitism online, and what can you be done to combat that? I mean, I've had other people on talking about the same thing, but what do you think when you see anti-Semitism online and the propaganda?
I would tell you that I want the online platforms to have to bear the same responsibility that I have to bear as the publisher of a publication. I believe in free speech. But I worship at the altar of free speech. But free speech and freedom of the press doesn't mean you have freedom of my press. If I publish something, I have to take responsibility. Even if if you send me a letter to the editor and it has your name on it, and it is something that is hate speech, illegal, incitement to violence, I'm the one who will and should get sued. I want the online platforms to follow the same guidelines we have to follow as in print journalism. What is that? That means that freedom, yes, we have freedom to print whatever we like, but we also have the responsibility that our name is on it, and that if somebody is doing something illegal, you will come after me. I would like the platforms to say no more anonymity. You want to print something, you want to post it, freedom of speech, you post it with your name. Susan Rosenbluth, an unsigned letter or an unsigned article is as valuable as an unsigned check. Sign your name. If I want, as the editor, if somebody sends me a letter and says, I'd like it published, I don't want my name, I can write, because I can say name withheld, because I can do that. I don't mind if the platforms do that, but it means I know who the person is. That means that if the police come after and say that's incitement, and we want to know who did that, you didn't realize this, that, or the other, I can say, yes, this is who sent me the letter. I want the platforms to know who the people are if they don't sign their names. And this means that, and if there is something, if the platforms, if the platforms receive something, I don't want them deciding, oh, this I like or this I don't like, unless they're going to also take responsibility.
Yeah, I can see.
In other words, I can be held responsible, but I can also be sued. Right now, these platforms do not have the responsibility and they cannot be sued. They can't have their cake and eat it too.
Well, I think it's because of both sides. I mean, the platforms itself is, just for people to be, it's like a forum, like, the soapbox. People get on their soapbox and can say what they'd like. And I don't disagree with you to some extent too, because I agree, you're entitled to say whatever you want. Any side can say whatever they want. And, but I would like
Jonathan, that means what you're saying, and I have no problem with it. That means we'd like to say that these social media platforms are really like public utilities. That means they cannot stop anyone.
True.
A public utility cannot say, oh, I like your politics, so you can have electricity. I don't like yours, you can't. They can't do that. So if you're going to say we are Hyde Park and you can come here and you can say whatever you want, I'll say fine, but that means you have to do it. And it means that if the police find something that is, I think we really have to look at what is the difference between incitement to violence. I don't follow with hate speech.
No,
I can't get inside your head. I don't know what is hate speech. But I think we can have certain standards for incitement to violence. Certainly, you fill in the blank, is incitement to violence. Right now, it is legal to say it. It is legal to carry a placard that says kill the Jews, kill the whatever else. It is legal. It shouldn't be.
I agree with you on that. And technically, it's not supposed to be allowed on the social media platforms. Do they always police it? No. And that's one of the problems.
But they will police, and we know that, well, until we started getting X, which is really endeavoring to do this, we know that the social media platforms have definitively been biased against the politically conservative readers and writers.
That is true. That's very true. And people talk about the cesspool that it is, but I have found it better now actually than beforehand with Twitter X, as far as I think Jewish voices were like muted beforehand.
Most definitively.
So the problem comes into now we live in this area of cancel culture that some people do it like the anonymity of being able to express their political opinions without worrying, hey, someone's going to contact my job. Someone's going to be firing me. It's
that I would say, again, I think that putting it in without your name is much, much less effective. If you have an opinion, I mean, think about it.
I agree.
Consider your opinion. I mean, if you're going to have an opinion on whether biological males should compete with girls in swimming matches, where no girl can possibly win. She doesn't have the muscle mass. She can't do it. If you're going to say, I'm opposed to that, have the courage of your convictions and sign it. You don't want to because you're afraid you'll lose your job, then don't say it. Or at least the platform has to know who you are. The same way I would have to know who you are for a letter to the editor.
So you also, going off that topic for a second, it's okay. You also get invited to speak at a lot of events. I saw pictures of you at a lot of events. I saw video things of you speaking there. How did that start happening? Did people start reaching out to you to like?
I get asked to speak at a lot of Jewish events. I get asked to speak at a lot of Christian events. People who are really curious. Jonathan, we have so many friends out there. I know it's so easy to concentrate on the terrible, and I'm really not trying to diminish the threat, and it's there, and I know it. I have a granddaughter at Columbia Law School, and my heart palpitates when knowing that she's going. It's true. But let's not forget the friends that we have. When Donald Trump stands at a rally, and I don't know, 25,000 people are at some of these rallies, and he says Israel, and they're screaming and yelling and cheering, and we have a lot of friends. We have, I mean, the fact that even Kamala Harris sees herself trying to walk a tightrope, I don't think it's helping her any. But the fact that she feels she has to work a tightrope says that we're not in as much trouble as we were in Berlin in 1933.
No, I agree. I mean, you can't compare Berlin. I agree with you that the government is not actively anti-Semitic. It's not, but there's an awful lot, and nor the police also. I agree with you on that. But there is an awful lot of, I'm not going to do anything about it either. That's the problem.
And I mean, when we see some of the polls, which are truly frightening, that there was one that I saw that was like 48% of Democrats said that they would like to see aid to Israel curtailed.
I saw that. Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I mean, is it balanced? Yeah. When 97% of Republicans and independents say that they support Israel, it's counterbalanced. But there's no question that it's greater than it used to be.
Well, I'm also talking about even just on police standing by watching these events, and
they will watch the events. They will watch the events, and if you will notice, a lot of our foes at the events are very, very careful to keep hands off, because the minute they start to go far, the police are standing by, but they're at the ready. Someone gets hurt and it's all bets are off, because I've seen that time and time again. The minute they step over that line, the police are on our side. They will, yes, they're yelling from the river to the sea. They don't even know what the river is. They don't know what the sea is. You know, what river are you talking about? The Hudson? They don't know. Even at Holy Columbia University, they don't know. We're talking really about ignoramuses. But that doesn't mean they're not dangerous. And the police aren't going to do anything because they're standing down with what we know is incitement. It's wrong. The laws have to change.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's one of the frightening aspects right now that I don't see enough being done there. So what advice would you give to someone who is struggling with dealing with anti-Semitism?
You know, the biggest thing that I think a lot of these universities have to lose is their brand. I think they're very frightened of losing their brand. It used to be, you say to someone, "Oh, my son's at Harvard," and everybody went, "Ooh." Now you say, "My son's at Harvard," and you get, "Oh." They've lost their brand. Not universally. Come on, I'm not crazy. They're not universally, but that's what they're losing. So I think that's also because I think for the first time this year, there isn't a single senior from Ramaz, which is one of the elitists of the Jewish day schools. Not a single one is going to Columbia. That's I mean, these are kids, I guarantee you, who have parents and grandparents who went, and they're not there. There are a lot of wonderful schools that are not Harvard and Yale. You have to look very carefully. You have to let people there. You're applying and you're looking, and they're talking about being competitive. You have to. You're spending a god awful lot of money to send the kid there, and you have to make sure that this is a school that's going to be teaching what you want your child to learn. There are wonderful other schools out there. Really, University of Florida is not putting up with it. University of Maryland didn't allow the kind of stuff that went on elsewhere. Didn't allow the kind of stuff that Rutgers had. There are many Jewish kids here in New Jersey. Rutgers University here is our state university, and it's an anomaly. If you were to ask people, how is Jewish life at Rutgers? It's fantastic. You have a Chabad house that has a dormitory. You can stay at a kosher dormitory across the street from campus. The Hillel is also a multi-million-dollar building with all kinds of wonderful amenities. There are at least 2 minyanim every morning, weekdays, because there are enough Jewish kids. Kosher food is ubiquitous on campus, never mind just at the Chabad and Hillel. Jewish life is great as long as you stay in the bubble. Leave the bubble, and you don't know what's going to happen on campus. Is your teacher going to make you uncomfortable? Maybe. It's the kind of thing that this is what many people are not sending their kids to Rutgers because of it. And you lobby, money talks. You go to your representatives, your state senators, and you tell them, I can't send my child, my grandchild, to Rutgers. And the only thing these schools will understand is funding. Cut it. Cut the funding. It'll stop the anti-Semitism. It'll stop the overt anti-Semitism.
Well, it's not just this. The funding does need to be stopped, but it also I've had on other people, students who are actually suing the schools.
Okay, it is the smartest thing. Listen, we were all audience to those to the presidents of Harvard and the University of Pennsylvania, and it was shocking. We need more of it, and it needs to be publicized and written about. And it's what you get when people have something to lose. They stop. There's a law that I think that's being promulgated. We all got very used to wearing masks during COVID. And these demonstrations on the heels of COVID, you have kids who are wearing masks. Mm-hmm. Wearing masks during public demonstrations was verboten. The Ku Klux Klan couldn't put their white sheets over their faces. You want to demonstrate? We're going to see who you are. And the minute you do that, Jonathan, they will stop. These are not brave people. They don't want to risk their jobs. And we know that when they're found out, we have some organizations who've done phenomenal jobs of rooting out what is going on. And people do lose their jobs, which means you keep those kinds of thoughts to yourself. You talk about people worrying about cancel culture. It works both ways.
No, that the account Stop Anti-Semitism has been fantastic in that.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yasher Koach, more power to them. May they go from strength to strength.
Yeah. Well, by the way, you mentioned Florida, and it's the University of Florida. I think Florida has been pretty good in cracking down on this in general. So now speaking of advice,
and they're not alone. They're not alone. You have there are marvelous schools that are saying, "Please come here. We get enough kids. We'll have kosher food on campus." These are wonderful schools. We have to start sending our kids to other schools. If the Ivy Leagues want us back, let them work for it. Our kids will do just fine at the other schools.
Oh, I agree.
And of course, I can't say enough about Yeshiva University, Stern, Touro. Touro is amazing. They're amazing. They're doing wonderful, wonderful work. And it's great for our kids. Great for our kids.
My oldest daughter works for Touro. So
God bless her. God bless her.
Now, off that topic, speaking of advice, though, you're in journalism. What advice would you give to someone looking to get into journalism?
Right. What do we, seat of pants to seat of chair.
Right.
Find something that interests you, write it. If you send it into newspapers, if you write something that they haven't touched, you'll get picked up. We have an American Jewish Press Association. You can get it on theirs. You can find anywhere. Don't expect to make big bucks at this.
In general.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. We're not. Things happen.
Right.
So And if you find ways to do it as we did with the Jewish Voice and Opinion, I mean, it certainly held its own, and which is fine. I think there's always room for interesting new platforms for someone who has something to say that is interesting. I think the explosion of people writing is wonderful. What is the best antidote to speech you don't like? More speech.
True. Well, how can people follow you on social media?
Actually, they're not. You can find us on Facebook, Susan Rosenbluth, or the Jewish Voice and Opinion. I love getting emails, Susan at jewishvoiceandopinion.com. That's AND, Susan at jewishvoiceandopinion.com. And Red Adept will be publishing my novel, which is Blurred Vision.
That's right. Let's talk about your novel. When's the novel? Tell me about the novel and when it's coming out.
I will. The novel, God willing, will be out sometime, I think, in 2025 is what they're saying. It's set in 1987 in Atlantic City because I knew it so well. And the topic is one that I handled as a journalist, and that's the subject of cults. And the biggest question for me was when I started writing about it is why Jews are 2% of the American population. That's it, 2%. Why were we 30 to 40% of some of the most destructive cults in the world? 30 to 40% of you. Are you old enough to remember the Moonies?
Of course, yeah.
I mean, 30 to 40% of the Moonies, of the Hare Krishnas, these children of God, which were terrible. And these were Jewish kids. Why? And that's what I tackled in my novel.
And what's the name of it?
Blurred Vision.
Blurred Vision. I will take a look out for that, and hopefully everyone buys it.
I hope you'll have me on again before it comes out.
Absolutely. You're welcome back anytime.
You're wonderful, Jonathan. Only good things, and kol tov.
You too. Well, I want to thank you again for coming on. It's been a pleasure talking.
Bye.
Again, this has been The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen. And again, a very special thanks to Susan Rosenbluth. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks for tuning in to The Jewish Lens, where all items used was strictly kosher.